At 6:30 on the morning of January 31st, 1921, a surfman named C.P. Brady was standing watch at the United States Coast Guard station on Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. The fog was lifting. The sea was rough, but not unusual for January in the Outer Banks. Brady scanned the water through his binoculars and stopped. There was a shape on the Diamond Shoals, the shifting sandbars that extend offshore from Cape Hatteras into some of the most treacherous water on the Atlantic coast. A large ship was hard aground on the outer bar. Her 5 masts were still standing. Her sails were still set, some of them torn and flapping in the wind. The ship's deck was awash with surf that broke over her hull, but there was no movement on board. No signal flag, no crew visible, no sign of life at all. Brady reported the sighting immediately, but the sea was too rough for the Coast Guard surf boats to reach the wreck. For 4 days, the ship sat on the shoals, battered by waves, visible from shore, but untouchable. It was not until February 4th that the weather broke enough for the wrecking tug Rescue and the Coast Guard cutter Manning to reach the vessel. Captain James Carlson of the Rescue led the boarding party. When he climbed over the railing and onto the deck, he found himself standing on a ship that was completely, impossibly empty. The vessel was the Carroll A. Deering, a 5-masted commercial schooner out of Bath, Maine. She was 255 feet long, 1,879 tons, and one of the last great wooden sailing vessels ever built. She had been launched in April of 1919 by the G.G. Deering Company, who named her after the owner's son. She was the largest and the last ship the company ever built, designed for an era that was already ending. Steam power was replacing sail across the world's shipping lanes, and the Carroll A. Deering was a relic of the old ways, beautiful and doomed, even before she became a ghost ship. She had departed Norfolk, Virginia, in August of 1920, in what the company described as tip-top shape, carrying a cargo of coal bound for Rio de Janeiro. Her original captain was William Merritt, a World War I hero who had been cited for bravery after saving his entire crew when his previous command sank. But shortly after departure, Merritt fell seriously ill and had to be replaced. The company sent Captain Wormel, a 66-year-old veteran mariner from Portland, Maine, to take over command. Wormel was experienced and respected, but he was aging. His eyesight was deteriorating, and he was walking into a crew he had not chosen and did not know. She was heading home to Hampton Roads, Virginia. She never arrived. When the boarding party searched the ship, they found a scene that would haunt investigators for the rest of the century. The first thing Captain Carlson noticed was the silence. A ship with crew makes noise constantly, the creak of ropes under tension, footsteps on deck, voices calling between the masts. The Carroll A. Deering made no sound except the waves breaking against her grounded hull and the wind snapping through her torn canvas. She was a dead thing, and she felt like one. In the galley, food had been laid out for the next meal. Pots sat on the stove. Coffee had been made. The preparation suggested that someone had been cooking when the ship was abandoned, or had been about to. The stove was no longer warm by the time the boarding party arrived, 4 days after the grounding, but the arrangement of the food made it clear that the crew had left in the middle of a routine that should have continued. 3 half-starved cats were found wandering the ship, crying for food that no one was left to give them. They were the only living things on board. Everything else was gone. The crew's personal belongings had been taken. Every sea chest, every bag, every item that a sailor would carry with him if he were leaving a ship and not planning to come back. The ship's log and all navigation equipment had been removed. The 2 lifeboats were missing, deliberately launched rather than torn away by the sea. Whoever left the Carroll A. Deering had done so with enough time and composure to gather their possessions and lower the lifeboats in an orderly fashion. This was not a panicked abandonment. It was a planned departure. But the most disturbing details were in the navigation room. The ship's wheel had been shattered. The binnacle box, the housing for the compass, had been smashed. The rudder had been disengaged from its stock, meaning the ship could not be steered even if someone had been at the helm. Someone had deliberately disabled the Carroll A. Deering's steering equipment before the ship ran aground. This was not an accident. The ship had been aimed at Diamond Shoals like a weapon and set loose. 11 men had sailed on the Carroll A. Deering. Captain Willis Wormel, the replacement skipper who had taken over command in Norfolk after the original captain fell ill. First mate Charles McLellan, a man whose name would become central to the most persistent theory about what happened. And 9 crew members whose names would never appear in a headline and whose bodies would never be found. All 11 vanished. No bodies washed ashore. No lifeboat was ever recovered. No wreckage from the missing boats was ever identified with certainty. The Atlantic took them all and left nothing behind. To understand what may have happened aboard the Carroll A. Deering, you have to go back to Barbados. The Deering had delivered her coal to Rio de Janeiro and was heading north for home in late December of 1920. She stopped in Bridgetown, Barbados, for supplies and rest. While in port, Captain Willis Wormel sought out another sea captain he knew, a Maine man named Hugh Norton, and spent a day talking to him. What Wormel told Norton was deeply unsettling. He said he was having serious trouble with his crew, particularly with his first mate, Charles McLellan. McLellan was, according to Wormel, habitually drunk while ashore and had been mistreating the crew. But what worried Wormel most was not McLellan's drinking. It was his resentment. McLellan was doing most of the actual navigation aboard the Deering because Captain Wormel's eyesight was failing. McLellan resented this. He felt he was doing the captain's work without the captain's authority, and he blamed Wormel for interfering when he tried to discipline the crew. The tension between the two men had been building for weeks. While in Barbados, McLellan got drunk and was overheard by several witnesses, including Captain Norton, his first mate, and another captain. McLellan's words were recorded and later repeated to investigators. He said, "I will get the captain before we get to Norfolk. I will." McLellan was arrested for drunkenness. Captain Wormel bailed him out of jail on January 9, 1921, and the Carroll A. Deering put to sea immediately, heading north for Virginia. The next documented sighting of the ship came on January 28th, when the Deering passed the Cape Lookout lightship off the North Carolina coast. The lightship's keeper, Captain Thomas Jacobson, reported something strange. A man aboard the Deering hailed the lightship through a megaphone, saying the ship had lost both her anchors in a storm off Cape Fear, and asking that the ship's owners, the G.G. Deering Company, be notified. But the man speaking was not Captain Wormel. Jacobson described him as tall and thin, with reddish hair and a foreign accent. He did not speak or behave like an officer. Jacobson took him for Scandinavian. More troubling, Jacobson noticed the crew milling around on the quarterdeck, an area where ordinary sailors were not normally permitted. The scene looked disorganized, chaotic, as though the normal hierarchy aboard the vessel had broken down. Jacobson's radio was out of order. He could not report what he had seen. The Carroll A. Deering sailed on. The following afternoon, January 29th, the crew of another vessel spotted the Deering sailing on a course that would take her directly onto the Diamond Shoals. They saw no one on her decks. They assumed the crew would spot the Cape Hatteras lighthouse or the Diamond Shoals lightship and change course in time. They did not attempt to hail the ship. It was the last time anyone saw the Carroll A. Deering sailing with any possibility of crew aboard. 2 days later, surfman Brady spotted the wreck on the shoals. What happened between January 28th, when the Deering passed Cape Lookout with a disorganized crew and a man who was not the captain speaking through a megaphone, and January 31st, when the ship was found abandoned with her steering destroyed and her lifeboats gone. The investigation that followed was one of the most extensive maritime inquiries in American history. 5 departments of the federal government became involved: Commerce, Treasury, Justice, Navy, and State. The case crossed the desks of the FBI, the Coast Guard, and the office of Herbert Hoover, then the Secretary of Commerce, who took a personal interest in the mystery. Hoover was particularly alarmed because the Carroll A. Deering was not the only ship to vanish in these waters around this time. The sulfur freighter Hewitt, carrying a crew of 42, had also disappeared in roughly the same area during the same period. Several other vessels of various nationalities had gone missing nearby. Although most of the other ships were later found to have sailed into the path of a series of powerful storms, the Deering and the Hewitt had been proven to be sailing away from the storm area at the time they vanished. Herbert Hoover's assistant, Lawrence Ritchie, was placed in charge of coordinating the investigation. Ritchie tried to reconstruct the Deering's final days by cross-checking the logbooks of every lightship and Coast Guard station in the area. He interviewed witnesses. He contacted maritime authorities in multiple countries. He found very little. But what alarmed Hoover most was not the Deering alone. It was the pattern. The sulfur freighter Hewitt had departed Sabine, Texas, in late January, with a crew of 42, carrying a cargo of sulfur to Boston. She entered the same general stretch of Atlantic water as the Deering around the same time. She was never seen again. No wreckage, no distress call, no survivors, no bodies. 42 men gone without explanation. At least 9 other vessels of various nationalities were reported missing in the Western Atlantic during this same period. Most were later accounted for, their disappearances attributed to a series of unusually powerful winter storms. But the Hewitt and the Deering had both been proven to be sailing away from the storm areas at the time they disappeared. Whatever took the Deering's crew and whatever sank the Hewitt, it was not the same weather that destroyed the other ships. The coincidence was too much for Hoover. He ordered a broader investigation into the possibility that some organized force, pirates, bootleggers, or even foreign agents, were operating in the Western Atlantic and attacking commercial shipping. The State Department began making inquiries with foreign governments. The theory of a Bolshevik conspiracy to steal American ships and crew and deliver them to Russian ports was raised in the press and taken seriously enough to investigate. Nothing came of it. No evidence of any organized operation was ever found. There was one more piece of evidence recovered from the Carroll A. Deering before she was destroyed, and it deepened the suspicion that Captain Wormel had lost control of his ship before it ran aground. Charts and maps recovered from the navigation room showed handwritten notes in the margins. Until January 23rd, those notes were in Captain Wormel's handwriting. After that date, the marginalia was in a different hand. Someone else had been navigating the Carroll A. Deering for the last week of her voyage. Whether Wormel was dead, incapacitated, or simply overruled by his crew is unknown. But from January 23rd onward, he was no longer directing the ship. The theories came fast. Mutiny was the most persistent. McLellan had threatened to get the captain before they reached Norfolk. Multiple witnesses had heard him say it. The disorganized crew on the quarterdeck at Cape Lookout, the non-officer speaking through the megaphone, the change of handwriting in the navigation notes, all pointed to a crew that had taken over the ship. Under this theory, the crew mutinied, killed or removed Captain Wormel, sailed the ship north under their own control, and then deliberately grounded it on the Diamond Shoals to destroy evidence. They fled in the lifeboats and were lost at sea when the boats could not survive the dangerous currents and waves off Cape Hatteras. Piracy was considered and largely dismissed. There was no evidence of violence aboard the ship. No blood, no signs of struggle. The ship's cargo hold was untouched. Pirates would have taken the cargo or the ship itself, not abandoned both on a sandbar. Furthermore, no organized piracy was known to be operating in Atlantic waters in 1921. Rum running was another theory. Prohibition had begun in the United States in January of 1920, exactly 1 year before the Deering disappeared. Bootleggers operating offshore were known to hijack vessels and their crews, but no evidence connecting the Deering to the liquor trade was ever found. The message in a bottle captured public attention. In April of 1921, a local fisherman named Christopher Columbus Gray claimed to have found a bottle on the beach at Buxton, North Carolina, containing a handwritten note. The note read, "Deering captured by oil-burning boat, something like chaser. Taking off everything, handcuffing crew. Crew hiding all over ship. No chance to make escape. Finder. Please notify headquarters of Deering." The note electrified the investigation. It suggested that the Deering had been attacked by another vessel, possibly a submarine chaser or a patrol boat repurposed by criminals. The State Department launched a new inquiry. Newspapers speculated about pirate gangs and even Bolshevik plots to steal American ships and sail them to Russia. By September of 1921, handwriting experts determined that the message in the bottle had been written by Christopher Columbus Gray himself. He had faked the entire thing. His motive, investigators concluded, was a petty grudge against the staff at the Cape Hatteras lighthouse, whose jobs he hoped to discredit so he could take one for himself. The most dramatic piece of evidence in the case was a fraud. The Carroll A. Deering was declared unsalvageable. In March of 1921, she was towed off the shoals and destroyed with dynamite to prevent her from becoming a hazard to other ships. A portion of her bow later drifted ashore on Ocracoke Island. Wooden timbers from the wreck washed up on Hatteras Island and were used by local residents to build houses. The ship that had carried 11 men into the unknown was dismantled by the ocean and parceled out to the people who lived beside it. The investigation continued for over a year and produced no definitive conclusion. The 5 government departments, the FBI, the Coast Guard, and the personal attention of the future President of the United States could not determine what happened to 11 men who vanished from a ship that was still making dinner when they left. Lulu Warmel, the daughter of Captain Willis Warmel, spent years trying to find out what happened to her father. She was the driving force behind the federal investigation, personally approaching Senator Frederick Hale of Maine to demand a concerted government inquiry. She was certain that if the crew had simply abandoned ship on the Diamond Shoals and taken the lifeboats to shore, the Coast Guard station was only 9 miles away. They would have been found. Her father would have come home. The fact that he didn't meant that something had happened to him before the ship reached the shoals. Something that prevented him from coming home, even if he wanted to. She never got an answer. No one ever did. The most widely accepted modern theory combines mutiny and misfortune. McLellan and the crew mutinied against Warmel sometime around January 23rd, the date the handwriting in the navigation notes changed. They took control of the ship, navigated it northward, and at some point decided to beach it on the Diamond Shoals to destroy evidence of whatever they had done. They disabled the steering to ensure the ship would stay grounded, launched the lifeboats, and attempted to reach shore 9 miles away. In the violent winter seas off Cape Hatteras, the lifeboats capsized or were swamped. Everyone drowned. The currents carried the boats and the bodies out to sea, and the Atlantic erased the last evidence of what had happened. It explains the destroyed steering. It explains the missing log and navigation equipment. It explains the food on the stove, left behind by men who were in a hurry to leave. It explains the change of handwriting. It explains why the man at Cape Lookout was not the captain. and it explains why no one ever came home. But it does not explain why no bodies ever washed ashore. It does not explain why no lifeboat wreckage was ever positively identified. It does not explain the disappearance of the Hewitt and the other vessels in the same waters during the same period. And it does not explain the feeling that anyone who reads the details of this case is left with. The feeling that something is missing from the story. Some piece of evidence that sank with the ship or floated away on the current, or was destroyed when the dynamite blew the Carroll A. Deering apart in March of 1921. The Diamond Shoals have claimed over 600 ships in their recorded history. They have earned the name the Graveyard of the Atlantic, and they deserve it. The shoals shift with every storm, rearranging themselves beneath the surface, creating new hazards where none existed the day before. The collision of the Gulf Stream and the Labrador Current produces weather that can change in minutes. Ships that sailed these waters did so at their own risk, and many of them paid. The Carroll A. Deering was the last great wooden sailing vessel to become a ghost ship. She was found the way ghost ships are always found: intact, empty, and offering just enough evidence to suggest a dozen explanations without confirming any of them. Food on the stove, cats wandering the deck, a shattered wheel, a missing crew, and a silence that has lasted over 100 years. 11 men boarded the Carroll A. Deering in Norfolk in the summer of 1920. A captain with failing eyesight and a first mate who had sworn to get him. 9 crew members whose names history barely recorded. They sailed to Brazil, delivered their coal, stopped in Barbados where the trouble boiled over, and then headed north for home. Somewhere between Barbados and the Diamond Shoals, between the last log entry in the captain's hand and the moment the ship ran aground with no one left to steer her, those 11 men were erased from the world so completely that a century of investigation has not produced a single body, a single lifeboat, or a single definitive answer. The Carroll A. Deering's bell and capstan are on display at the Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum in Hatteras. The timbers from her hull are in the walls of houses built by the people of the Outer Banks. And somewhere in the Atlantic, in the currents that run past the Diamond Shoals and carry everything they take into the deep, 11 men are still missing. If you want to hear the stories of what else the sea has taken and never returned, subscribe. There is always another ship that never came home.